Welcome to Bass Week 2025. I'm Danny Garrett alongside Tyler Parsons, and we're fisheries biologists with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We've been doing Bass Week, I think, 7 years now. This has been an annual promotion we do, trying to encourage people to get out and enjoy the warm water resources of Washington. It's particularly catered for beginners or new residents of the state that don't realize just how much bass we have in the state and how fun they are to fish for. And obviously it can be pretty intimidating getting into bass fishing with all the lures and things that you see in the tackle stores. So we're going to try to break down a little bit of that today. But first I want to mention that I'm part of the warm water program here at Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's been around since 1997, and we primarily conduct stock assessment on warm water fisheries around the state, specifically in areas where where our policy says it's appropriate to manage for warm water fish, and that's most of the lakes in the state that aren't connected to salmon-bearing waters or places where there's native species concerns. You'll notice when you look at your Fish Washington regulations app on a lot of our lakes, we have protective regulations for both largemouth and smallmouth bass in most places, including a 12 to 17 inch slot, protected slot for largemouth bass, and for smallmouth you can only harvest one over 14 inches. The program does stocking as well as channel catfish stocking and tiger muskie stocking, and then we of course do outreach and occasionally produce videos like Tyler and I are producing today. So first off, we're going to talk about where largemouth bass and smallmouth bass are located. Largemouth bass are well distributed around the state. If you want to get on our Lowland Lake search engine, you can type in largemouth bass and find all the lakes where largemouth bass occur. They're in all of the smaller, shallower, weedy lakes that warm up really quickly. Smallmouth bass are more restricted to those deeper reservoir situations with cooler water, lots of rock, so they're not as well distributed, but the populations we have of smallmouth bass are very robust, very abundant, and there's excellent opportunities for those fish as well. So let's talk about the different seasons. Obviously you can catch bass in the dead of winter. We see people catch largemouth bass through the ice in December or January, but for the most part you got to wait for springtime for them to warm up a little bit to be very successful catching them. Tyler, why don't we talk a little bit about smallmouth bass and the different seasons and how that might change from spring to summer to fall.
Sounds good. Most of my smallmouth bass fishing comes from western Washington. Lakes like Lake Sammamish, Lake Washington, American Lake, a little bigger reservoirs, and they have some depth to them. So in late winter, early spring, we're looking for fish in that 60 to 80 feet range and fishing really slow. All your presentations need to be really slow. Your gear's usually on the heavier side. These fish are cold-blooded, so their metabolism in water that's only 45 degrees is going to be a lot slower than water that's 75 degrees in the summer. So in the winter and spring, you really have to slow things down and keep it in front of them for a longer period of time. As the water warms up, those fish will move out of that deep water into that 10 to 25 foot zone. Pre-spawn fish looking for areas where they can come up, make beds, and spawn and repeat that part of their life cycle. As after they spawn and they're post-spawn, they're looking to recover some of those energy sources. So they're going to be a little more aggressive. The water's warmed up again. They're moving around more. So we're looking into shallower flats, those 15 feet and shallower in the flats. Again, trying to find docks that are over 15 or 20 feet deep instead of 5 or 6 feet deep, shallow docks. We're looking for deeper stuff. In the dead of summer, when water temperatures are their highest and air temperatures and the sun and everything are the most intense, those fish might drop off into that 20 or 30 foot range and kind of hide out from too warm of water and too cold of water, and really find that Goldilocks zone of water temperature where other prey species are also moving to that water and they can metabolize the best that they can. And that pattern kind of continues into the fall. These fish are going to go through a harsh winter period, like you were saying. Maybe the whole lake ice is over and everything slows way down, and availability of prey becomes a lot harder to find. So these fish are going to want to pack on some calories, some extra fat, and have reserves for the winter time. So in that case, I'm still looking in that 25 to 30 foot range of water depth, trying to find structure that's out there, and trying to find, or I guess using lures that are moving a little more active still. So
Gotcha.
that's kind of where I would be.
Well, and largemouth bass are similar in all of those stages, except they're a warmer water species than the cool water species of smallmouth bass. So they have slightly higher tolerances for warm water, and that's why they tend to do better, and their young tend to do better in warm situations in smaller lakes. So as we transition from the winter into like early spring, like in March, it's still very cold and quite difficult to get a bite. But some of the biggest largemouth bass are caught every year in March and April as they first slide up to warm up on those first warm days. So it can be advantageous to get out there early in the year. The best time by far is probably as we get into May or even late May, as you get into that pre-spawn period. The water's now in the 60s. The bass have warmed up enough to where they're actively feeding on whether it be crayfish or bluegill, yellow perch, whatever's most available. And they're looking to slide up on those flats and spawn in late May to even early June in our cooler reservoirs. So that's a great time to target them, and it's just a great time to find them as they move up shallower and they're more accessible to us fishing with rods and reels and some variety of different baits too as they move up shallower. Into the summer, similar to smallmouth bass, they're not going to want to be in the hottest water of the lake in mid-July. So as you transition from post-spawn into summer, there might be an early morning bite that Tyler will talk about with some of his moving baits where the fish are shallower and they're actively feeding. But as in the heat of the day, as that water warms up, they may slide off into 5 to 10 to 12 feet of water, slightly deeper water, not as deep as smallmouth, but they're gonna seek out cooler water because they're done feeding for the day, they're in resting mode, and they want to be at the right metabolism to conserve energy. So there's going to be kind of a dichotomy between morning and afternoon in the summer. But it can be excellent fishing, especially first thing in the morning on some topwater baits that Tyler's going to discuss here in a minute. So fall is similar to spring. The water cools down. Those fish are moving around and they're shallow or shallower than the summer. Also a really hot time to be fishing in September into October until it gets really cold, and then the bite slows down precipitously as their metabolism slows down. So anytime you're in the 60s, I would say is the sweet spot. As you get down into the 50s, you can still catch them quite readily, but the bite will slow down, and it's certainly by the time you get into lake temperatures in the 40s, the bite's pretty darn slow. So let's talk about some baits, and Tyler and I first want to focus on the easiest bait for a beginner angler, and probably the most commonly used baits in Washington to catch a bass. And we'll start off with the stick bait.
Yeah, so this is, again, like Danny said, one of the most common baits and one that I go to almost every day that I'm out bass fishing. This is a 3-inch stick bait. This one's made by Yamamoto. This is a Senko. What I'll do is, again, a very simple setup. We're just going to have a spinning rod and reel. Main line gets tied to a finesse wide gap hook. This one happens to have a weed guard on it, which I can show you guys, but I just run the hook right through the middle of this stick bait. It's often referred to as wacky rigged, and then as the bait is falling through the water column, this is going to be weightless, just rigged just like this. So as it falls through the water column, those ends of the tails are going to vibrate and put off attraction to these largemouth bass. And if they're uptight next to, like if you're fishing against the bank or the reeds or some lily pads, throwing this right up tight to it, you're not going to get snagged up too much. This is just a great easy bait. It's a producer, can help you locate some fish, and then maybe you go with different tactics after those fish. But most of the time you're going to get a bite on just a Senko like this.
And even though this is a beginner bait, you'll find people in tournaments commonly switching to this bait in the middle of the day when they can't get a bite because it's really that effective. And a bait that's somewhat similar, although going to be fished typically more for smallmouth, and I would say around places that aren't as weedy because there's typically not a weed guard on this setup, is the drop shot rig. And the drop shot rig is set up with a hook tied onto your main line here, suspended above a weight that is 6 to 12 to 14, 16 inches. You can vary this length depending on where you're trying to target the fish. and you'll tie on your drop shot hook or a small hook. Typically, they sell drop shot hooks. You can find them in the store. You'll tie that on with like a Palomar knot, and you'll take your main line. You'll go right down through the top of the eye of the hook with the point pointed up. And that way, when you pull that line tight, the hook is going to stand up nice and straight. And typically, you'll hook these fish right in the roof of the mouth. Your weight's going to vary by if you're fishing shallow or deeper. You're going to put on more weight if you're fishing down deep for smallmouth in 20, 30 feet of water. And then you're going to have some type of finesse worm on the end of here. There's a lot of options from robo worms to small stick baits like the Senko. There's a sniper company makes snubs that are also very popular. There's just a lot of different options, but you can find what works for you. And you're going to basically just cast this out similar to the stick bait. It's kind of a do-nothing bait. You oftentimes will catch them when it's falling down, or if you're just dragging it back to the boat. But when you do impart action to this bait, you want to try to not move the weight up off the bottom. You're going to try to put just enough waggle to your rod to get that worm to dance, just like a real minnow would. And it's absolutely irresistible, and why the Senko and the drop shot are top 2 baits for catching a bass in Washington. So now we're going to go through a variety of other baits. We're going to break these up into moving baits, or search baits, you might call them, as you're seeking out and trying to find bass throughout the day. And we'll kind of highlight the summer here to start off. And then I'll talk about some baits that are more, you know where the fish are, you're trying to slow down and probe the cover a little more. So Tyler, take it away.
So when I get, we're living over here in eastern Washington. If I go to the lake in the morning, it's sunrise. The first thing I'm going to throw, looking to cover some water, if I've got a 100-yard section of lily pads in front of me, I'm gonna tie a frog on. This happens to be a black and yellow one. They come in so many different colors. The tails or the legs here are long on most of them. They're customizable. You can trim them however short or long you want these. I will tie braided line onto this and throw it right back into some thick cover and swim it out, or try and kind of crawl it out of there as naturally as I can, thinking of how a frog moves in its life, trying to recreate that, coming from lily pad down into the water, and you can really cover a lot of ground with this. That being said, this usually only works for the first half an hour in the morning, that first light, and then fish come, they move from keying in on top water stuff to that mid water column and then on the bottom. So they're looking for stuff that's in the water at that point. And at that point, I would go to, it's been an hour, I'm going to go to something, I'm going to start with this one. This one is called, I guess it's a bladed jig, but this particular one is a chatterbait. It's got a dual lock snap on the front of this blade here. You would tie your main line right to this dual lock, and I have this one rigged up with a swim bait plastic on here as a trailer. It's got a little paddle tail that mimics a bait fish kicking through the water. I'll take this bait and I'll throw it up. We have a lot of thick weeded sections of the lakes over here, and if the weeds are 2 or 3 feet under the surface of the water, I'll throw it right up into them and swim it right along the top of those weeds, not letting it get into the weeds as much, because you have a big open hook here that's going to catch a ton of debris. But if you can get it to swim right on top of those those weeds, a lot of the times the bass are sitting in the cover, hidden, and they'll come up and strike your lure out of the cover. If you have a choppier day or a windy day where there's 5-mile-an-hour wind and the surface has kind of a broken silhouette to it, a lot of people will throw a spinner bait. These baits are tied again to this point right here where I'm holding, and these blades spin around as you're retrieving it through the water column and put off a ton of vibration and sight, that visual attraction for these largemouth to feel it on their lateral line, pick up that sensory deal, and come up and aggressively attack this bait. Again, you can cover that 100-yard stretch of shoreline in 10 minutes if you want to, depending on how fast you're moving, but you can really cover a lot of ground and do what they call, I guess, fan cast. You know, if you're sitting in one spot with your boat and you can go left to right across that whole area and then move your boat and then go left to right again, and you can just cover all kinds of water with these. If you get into a spot where you want to go a little deeper, there are crankbaits like this one. This will go down, you know, anywhere from 5 to 8 feet of water. You would tie your main line onto this eyelet here, and it's gonna rock back and forth in the water column. You can hear, I don't know if you can hear, but there's rattles in it. It again excites those fish. It gets all their instincts going, and they come up and grab it. You'll see this one doesn't have one of these lips on it, but you would tie your main line a little higher, and then the face acts as the lip. This one is about 3/4 ounce as well, so it's heavier. It's going to sink through the water column. I like to fish this one in the late spring, early fall, when you want it to get down in the water column. Those fish are maybe in 20 feet of water, but maybe they're suspended, and you want to feed them at 20 feet instead of, they're not going to come up to 6 or 8 feet to hit this one. Maybe we're going to go deeper. Get after them with this. This one, again, it rattles like crazy. It appeals to multiple senses and tries to attract those fish in. Again, we're trying to optimize this, you know, this seeking behavior, this aggressive behavior from these bass with these moving baits, trying to cover water and find groups of fish where then hopefully we can stop and throw a couple of things that you got.
Probe the water a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much fun too. You get vicious strikes on some of these lures, and they'll pull your arm off when they hit. So it's pretty exciting to fish these moving baits. So slowing things down a little bit now, we're going to just talk about jigs and Texas rigged soft plastics. Texas rigged means is how this soft plastic is threaded on the hook. We're not going to go into the details of how to rig this because you can look that up online. But jigs and soft plastics are popular across the country, have been since the 70s when the first soft plastic came out. It was just a rubber worm, and that still works today. But jigs, we'll start off with jigs. It's basically a hook with a rubber or silicone skirt coming off of it. It usually has a weed guard, so you can fish this thing around just about anything without getting hung up, especially wood. And oftentimes these jigs, you'll put a trailer on them, or it's very popular too, most people do, which just increases the profile of the bait and also helps them to kind of crawl their way over cover. This happens to be a swim jig, which you can swim along, kind of like the chatterbait there over the tops of the weeds. But a lot of times these jigs are going to be where you're going to get it to the bottom, where you get it on the cover, and you're going to move it a little bit. You might even vibrate it without even moving, and you're going to wait for a bite, and you're going to hop it. A lot of times when they hit these baits, they'll either pick it up off the bottom, or you'll hop it, and as that bait starts to fall, you'll feel a tick, 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 or a thunk, thunk, thunk as they suck in that bait. So they're going to want to hit this bait when it's most vulnerable, typically when it's falling. So you'll do like a yo-yo thing back to the boat, or you'll get it down the cover, you'll creep it over a branch and let it fall, and that's when they're going to hit it. Same thing with the Texas Rig soft plastic. This happens to be one of my favorites. It's a Zoom brush hog, but there's a lot of different manufacturers of these worm and creature baits. This has a lot of appendages that put off vibrations, like Tyler was talking about. Really can help they feel it on their lateral line and come over and hit it. And this too is meant to be fished relatively slow. If there's no cover or you're fishing it through grass, I like to just work it real slow when the water temperature is cold, just barely creeping it along the bottom. If it's a little warmer, I might hop it off the bottom and then drop it back down. A lot of different ways you can fish this bait depending on how reactive the fish are that day and how warm the water temperature is. But don't get too frustrated with your early attempts. You know, it takes a lot of time sometimes to get a bass to bite one of these and then to gain confidence with how to set the hook. That is one difference with a lot of these baits, is they're going to take it in their mouth and you're going to have to set the hook by pulling pretty swiftly back on the rod, whereas something with treble hooks, they're going to hook themselves basically when they hit. And so that's just something, there's a learning curve to that you'll pick up over time. And then if the jig and the soft plastics aren't working, you're going to go over and you're going to fish this Senko, because the bass will hit a stick bait or a Senko or any other type of salt impregnated bait better than just about any of these baits. But really fun, I think, to fish a jig and a Texas rig around cover. It's fun to feel the cover. It's very weird if you haven't bass fished, right, Tyler, to actually I'm actually trying to make contact with this cover. As a beginner, you might think, well, I'm going to hang it up. Well, if you're not hanging up a lure, you're probably not fishing for bass correctly, at least around woody cover. Around grass, you'll haul weeds back and think, I'm doing it wrong. And I should say that a lot of times I switch from a jig to a soft plastic that's a little more slippery and will glide through the weeds a little better. So if you're hauling weeds with a skirted jig, maybe switch to a soft plastic. But big difference here, right, Tyler, between baits where they're really coming after it, the water's warming up, they're willing to chase, it's early morning, and then maybe you have to work a little harder for a bite, right, in terms of
exactly.
How big is that strike zone, right?
Yeah, exactly. With colder water temperatures, again, those fish are going to maybe relate to structure or hang tight, I guess, to, let's say you have a field of stumps out here. I'm thinking of a lake like Lake Kapowsin up in Bonnie Lake area. And it's just got stump fields everywhere. Well, the water temperature, let's say early spring, maybe the water temperature is 45 degrees. But near those stumps, because the sun has been heating that wood structure up all day, maybe a pocket of 2 feet around that stump, maybe that water is 50 or 55 degrees. So having something that can get tight to structure, that's a little heavier, that you can keep near that structure for a longer period of time, keeping it in the strike zone, can really increase your catch rate and have fewer days getting skunked. I know I still get skunked. I've been fishing bass for 20 years. Sometimes I just don't want to eat. Sometimes I'm not presenting it in the right way, but we have a lot of options here, and just getting out, fishing, practicing, trying to, maybe talking with other anglers. There are some bass fishermen that are pretty tight-lipped on what they do, but for the most part, most people out there are willing to help and help you try and maybe hone in a technique, or maybe you were fishing in 18 feet of water, but they were in 13 feet, and you just missed them by just 10 yards of shoreline. So
Yep.
yeah, those are all of these baits can all function great for what they're intended for. Yeah.
And that's really the fun thing about bass fishing, folks, is it's a lifelong pursuit. You always have something new to learn. I think Tyler and I and other people that love to bass fish just find it super interesting trying to figure those fish out. There's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of details. You can get bogged down, but it is a really fun pursuit to try to figure out what these bass are doing and how to get them to bite. For Tyler and I and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, we really thank you for watching this video on how to catch bass. We encourage you to submit your photos this week to the photo contest. We hope to see some really big bass and some really fun pictures of excited faces, and especially kids holding up bass. Thank you for your support, and good luck fishing.
Take care.